I thought that I always wanted to be like a CEO of like a big Fortune 500 company.
What most of allopathic medicine fails to see is that there's a cause and an effect.
I hated it. I felt like my soul was dying, and I was really into health and figuring out my own health. And I started seeing a fella that changed my life. When people come to see me, I change their diet. I always do an elimination diet for 30 days to see what foods are contributing. What ended up happening was people came to me time after time again, like, I want to do the diet. I want to be able to do that. I just can't. I just can't stay off of carbohydrates. I just can't stay off of chips. I just can't stay off of chocolate.
The house I used to live in before where I live now had black mold, and it disrupted my health along with, silver and amalgam fillings. But I had to get out of that source. I became so chemically sensitive that when I just got out of that whole environment, my body started to heal. Hey Keto Camper, I am super excited to bring on Dr. Ann Barter so we can talk all about neurotransmitters. This is the first time we went really deep into this topic here on the Keto Camp YouTube channel and Keto Camp podcast, but you're going to understand why we went really deep and we geeked out together. We get into what exactly are neurotransmitters and how methylation works inside of the body. We'll discuss the best ways to test your neurotransmitters, how ketosis actually benefits your neurotransmitters like dopamine and serotonin. I asked her the question, like, what does somebody do who's following keto, but they keep sabotaging themselves? They say, I'm gonna stay strict, I'm gonna be in ketosis, but then they see the bag of chips or soda and they sabotage their results. What is happening to this person at the neurotransmitter level? And you're going to just love her answer. And then I asked her the best foods for neurotransmitters, the worst foods for neurotransmitters. So let's get right into this interview with Dr. Ann Marie Barter. Dr. Ann Marie Barter is a chiropractor who serves in the Denver metro area. Dr. Barter has graduated from the University of Western States in Portland, Oregon, an accredited 4-year doctoral program that is considered a leader in evidence-based medicine and the first chiropractic school to be awarded a federal research grant. Dr. Barter underwent rigorous clinical training with some of the finest chiropractors. Dr. Barter has undergone advanced training in applied kinesiology, completing over 400 extra classroom hours, and is certified to practice applied kinesiology. She has also studied under one of the most brilliant guys out there, Dr. Kazarian. So without further ado, let's bring on Dr. Ann Marie Barter. Hey, Ann.
Hey, how's it going? Thanks so much for having me. I'm glad to be here.
I was on your awesome podcast, the Fearless Health Podcast, which is available now. Go listen to it. And now I am reciprocating, and we're going to have an amazing conversation all about neurotransmitters. Are you ready?
Yeah, actually, I was so funny right before I got on. My office manager was like, yeah, you have the interview with Ben today. He's so awesome. He's so engaging. You guys are going to have such a good time. So anyway, she said, I loved listening to his podcast.
Oh, that's so great. She's right. Cool? We're gonna have a great time. That is super cool. Tell her I said thank you so much.
I will. I totally will.
So let's start with your story. Let's dive deep into how you got involved with what you're doing today. You're doing a lot of cool work and a lot of alignment with what I study and what I teach. So I just love what you're doing. How did you get involved with this?
Yeah, so I thought that I always wanted to be like a CEO of like a big Fortune 500 company. So I sort of pursued that dream. I graduated school. I went to work at Lockheed Martin. I did major systems negotiations. And I remember hating it. I hated it. I felt like my soul was dying. And I was really into health and figuring out my own health. And I started seeing a fella that changed my life. And so I think that that's what got me into it. But the background story on that, I remember when I was about 16, I went to I went to the doc and I said, something's wrong. My skin is breaking out. I just feel like how much I'm running and exercising, I should be skinnier, which was not true. That was between my ears. And my periods are really bad. Like I just have really bad period cramps. And she ran blood work and she said the dreaded, you're normal. There's nothing wrong with you. You're normal. I'm like, well, okay, great. So I said, I just thought, oh, this is what I have to deal with for the rest of my life. And I remember one morning I woke up, it was 2 years later, And I had such bad stomach pain. I walked into my mom's room and I said, Mom, hey, can I stay home from school today? Which was pretty atypical for me. I really liked school. I was really involved. And she said, we're going to take you to a different doctor. She said, can you even stand up straight? I'm like, no, it's just bad period cramps. So it turned out that my confusion with period cramps was my appendix exploding. And I was rushed into emergency surgery. And the whole time they're like, oh, you're perfectly healthy as I'm getting organs removed out of my body. You're in
Right.
great shape. You're doing wonderful. And I'm like, oh, okay, this is just all, even at 18, I was like, that seems so strange. Fast forward another year, I started breaking out into severe hives. It sent me to the emergency room night after night. Clearly, I was Benadryl deficient. There was nothing else going on. Nobody talked to me about diet. Nobody talked to me about anything else going on. And so finally, I started seeking care from natural, holistic providers. And here I am today because they actually changed my life. They actually dug deep. They talked to me about diet. They talked to me about environmental pollutants. They talked to me about hormones, etc. And we started to correct those things. And so that lands me here today. And so that is my story.
That's a very powerful story. And in a sense, I'm sorry you went through all that, but then I'm happy because it took you to where you are today. And you now have the experience when somebody does come to you with these similar problems that you had, you could share your story with them and it'll inspire them to actually dig a little bit deeper and get to the cause. Because what most of allopathic medicine fails to see is that there's a cause and an effect, not just a cause, I mean, not just an effect, excuse me. It doesn't just show up overnight. So I love that you teach that. And why did you get into neurotransmitters? What sparked your interest in that area?
So I will, when people come to see me, I change their diet. I always do an elimination diet for 30 days to see what foods are contributing. I give people the option. I say we can do an elimination diet. We can run a test. I really highly recommend the free option to actually see how your body's responding to foods. But if push comes to shove, we can run a test to actually see what foods maybe like are seeping between the radar. But anyway, what ended up happening was people came to me time after time again, like, I want to do the diet. I want to be able to do that. I just can't. I just can't stay off of carbohydrates. I just can't stay off of chips. I just can't stay off of chocolate. I crash. I hit a wall. I can't figure it out. And they came to me so ashamed, and they said, is this a willpower issue? And after person, I started to think, I wonder what else is going on here. And I remember one day driving home, and I talked to people about health all day long, and I just felt exhausted. And I found myself stopping at Whole Foods to get a cookie, and I'm like, what am I doing? I felt so guilty. I felt so shameful. And I just started to look at, okay, I started to run some tests on myself, and my neurotransmitters were in the toilet. And so what I was trying to do was I was trying to boost them up temporarily because my stress level increased. And what I didn't know at the time was I was actually being exposed to an environmental toxin, aka black mold. And
Mm.
so that was contributing to a lot of my problems. So my dopamine was just flatlined. And so I walked into my office one day, and I looked at my associate doc, and I said, I don't know if I can treat today. Like, something's wrong with me, and I feel so worthless. I feel hopeless. And that was dopamine deficiency from the mold exposure. And so I was trying to help myself with processed carbohydrates, because what happens is it's going to spike it for a short period of time. But guess what? It comes back down. And so that's what got me into neurotransmitters. So then I could relate to what my patients were going through firsthand. And so, as part of the elimination diet, a lot of times I'll run an organic acids test or I'll run a test to check to see what their neurotransmitters are if they're struggling with changes to their diet.
So did you get out of that mold exposure? Did you remediate? What did you do about the mold?
I moved out after I figured out what was going on. I basically I was renting at the time. This was years ago. I was renting at the time, and I called the landlord and said, "Hey, I need you to take care of this." Well, I think that, when you mention mold, like, it goes dead, like silent, like it's like a showstopper. It's like it was, so they didn't respond to me, and I said, "Listen, I'm not trying to litigate or do anything like that. I just need this mold cleaned out, or, we need to figure out another option because this is making me sick. And, can we figure out what's going on here? And they're like, oh, okay, now we'll get on it. So, so they remediated the house, but I still didn't feel right. And so I left and moved out.
Yeah, that's probably the best thing to do if it's an option. Unfortunately, for some people, it's not an option. But I have a similar story that the house I used to live in before where I live now had black mold, and it disrupted my health along with silver amalgam fillings. But I had to get out of that source. I became so chemically sensitive that when I just got out of that whole environment, my body started to heal. So you mentioned that the mold depleted your dopamine. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter. So let's start with exactly, if somebody has no idea what a neurotransmitter is. They know it's in the brain, they hear neuro, but what exactly are neurotransmitters?
Right. So they're messengers, they're chemical messengers for your body. So neurotransmitters they work in the brain. So we think about neurotransmitters as making us feel good, our feel good neurochemicals. That's what we're talking about. But they also run things like digestion, they run things like muscle coordination. They have other functions in the body beyond just like happy, feel good brain neurochemicals, but that's what they're most known for. So they are just our messengers to our body. So they're pretty important. And so they're at a higher level. So when we're thinking about, like, for example, adrenal health, like we hear adrenal health thrown around, adrenal fatigue, adrenal exhaustion. I mean, when you get to a very progressive point like Addison's disease or
Mhm.
Cushing syndrome. But when we're looking at, for example, dopamine shares a pathway with epinephrine and norepinephrine, which are fight or flight chemicals. And so that actually, is associated with your adrenal health. So sometimes when someone is exhausted, or when somebody doesn't feel good, or etc., or they have some of these what look like adrenal fatigue symptoms, could be dopamine depletion.
So when dopamine is depleted for whatever reason, mold, and we'll get into some of the more common causes of depletion, that means your fight or flight is activated, and then you're chronically pumping out stress. Let me know if I'm getting this right. You're pumping out stress, and then all of a sudden your adrenal starts to fatigue. Is that what's happening?
Maybe.
Okay.
Maybe. So a lot of, dopamine can become depleted for a variety of reasons, and we can get into that. But what ends up happening is some people don't methylate correctly, which means that they can't tap into, dopamine or norepinephrine pathway correctly. So maybe they're a little bit out of balance because you're not tapping into it. Chronic stress, for sure, can also deplete dopamine. So you're going to run through both of those pathways. So yes, you are correct, but it could also be that they can't tap into it because of a methylation issue and they're having trouble.
And when Dr. Ann says stress, there's three areas. There's mental, emotional, there's chemical, and there's physical. And it could be any one of those that could deplete this. You mentioned methylation. Could you go a little bit deeper and explain what methylation is?
So what's happening in this particular pathway is right. So okay, so you have to have B12, and you have to have B6, and you have to have folate, and you have to have magnesium and copper and vitamin C to run this pathway. Those are all of the nutrients involved in this pathway. Then when you get to the bottom of the pathway, you can either go into dopamine, or you can go into epinephrine or norepinephrine, your fight or flight chemicals. And you need SAMe to be able to make that conversion. If you don't have enough of that, you're going to see an imbalance on, for example, an organic acids test. This is where I see this imbalance. So what will happen is, for example, dopamine will be really, really high and epinephrine will be really, really low, like some of these cofactors that we see because somebody can't convert. Is that all the time? No, absolutely not. That's why you have to run the test to figure it out, to see what's going on with these pathways. And you could just be flatlined in both. Let's say you don't have the nutrients to run that pathway. Let's say you're severely deficient in magnesium. Would I call that like a methylation issue? Not really. But, or you might be depleted in a lot of the chemicals, like a lot of the nutrient chemicals, like, B12, B9, you might not be getting the right forms of that, etc. So you just have to make sure that you're running the pathway appropriately. And for example, one of the things that I think causes stress in this pathway itself is not having the right nutrients. And that is something commonly I see. I'll tell you time and time again, when I run testing, people are depleted in magnesium, they're depleted in B6, and they are depleted in vitamin C like it is going out of style. Those things are super duper duper common to see depletions in. So I just want to make sure people know that these things are very common. And it could be as simple as, hey, I just need to, support, my body with maybe some nutrients on this pathway, and that will help it run a little bit better. So it can be, as fancy as environmental chemicals, which I think most people have. I see a lot of environmental chemicals in my practice, but it could also be as simple as nutrient deficiencies, or guess what? Most people have all of it. So, and when we're, so I just also want to talk about, because we're kind of talking like abstract about dopamine. So I'd like to read a list of dopamine depleted symptoms, because I think that people can relate to this, because dopamine is so important. It's our hedonistic neurochemical, and it's awesome. Like, it makes people feel good, gives people runner's high, etc. But here's what we see when we're dopamine depleted. And this list is not comprehensive. And so a lot of times people have one or two things on this, but when we run testing, they will be full-blown dopamine depleted. And so some of the things that we look for are feelings of hopelessness, self-destructive thoughts, an inability to handle stress, anger and aggression while under stress. You're not feeling rested after long hours of sleep. You prefer to isolate yourself from others. You have unexplained lack of concern for family and friends. You're easily distracted from tasks. You have an inability to finish tasks. You need to consume caffeine to stay alert. Your libido has been decreased. You lose your temper for minor reasons, and you have feelings of worthlessness. This list was actually created by Datis Karazian, so I want to give him credit where credit is due. But generally what we see is people will have a lot of symptoms of this if they're being honest. And even 1 to 2 positives on this, a lot of times, again, when you run the testing, they are very, very deficient, and people have learned to live with it, which is what makes me so sad. And so we use things to help us, like sugar or processed carbohydrates.
So that list, so many people listening right now or watching on YouTube are thinking, oh my God, ding, 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 that's me, that's me, that's me, that's me. So what are the first steps to test? Is the organic acids test, is that what you recommend? I want to pause this interview real quick and say thank you so much for watching it up until this point. If you're getting any value so far, please smash the thumbs up button here on the video and subscribe to the Keto Camp YouTube channel and hit the bell so you're notified when we release a brand new video. I want to direct you to the episode sponsors, Purity Coffee, which is mold-free, mycotoxin-free, pesticide-free, the best and healthiest coffee I've ever come across. Every morning I have my delicious cup of Purity Coffee, and I'm grateful to have them a sponsor of the Keto Camp podcast. We have an exclusive coupon code for you, Keto Camper, to get 10% off your delicious cup and delicious bag of Purity Coffee beans. Head to ketocampcoffee.com and use KetoCamp at checkout. You could also see the link down below in the video notes. Also, Pureform, which is the best alternative to fish oil. If you've been following my work, then you know that 83% of fish oil is rancid on the shelf before you even consume it. Even the other 17% that is the most pristine in the world turns rancid once it enters your body, because your body is very warm and fish oil needs to be stored at a cool temperature, making fish oil more harmful than it is helpful. So I don't personally take fish oil. I use a plant-based omega from Pureform, and they have the proper ratios of omega-6 to omega-3. It's infused with nitrogen to prevent it from going rancid, and I take it every single day. We have a coupon code with Pureform. Check out the link down below and get your bottle of Pureform. All right, let's get back to this conversation with Dr. Ann Marie Barter.
I do that. There's other tests out there, but that's primarily what I use in my practice. So it's a urine test, and I think it's important. There's a why I think this test is awesome is because it does have some tests to check a little bit for black mold in this particular test. And so a pro tip that it was funny, my sister called me recently and she said, she was having all these symptoms. We went on a bike ride together and I was like, wow, you sound so bad. Like your breathing is rough. Like, have you been checked for mold? Because it sounds like mold. She's like, oh no, I cleaned that out of my house. I was working with someone, I cleaned that out. And I was like, all right, yeah, you might want to recheck that and you need to do a glutathione challenge with it. So what I always recommend with this test is I recommend doing a glutathione challenge prior to running the test, since there are light duty mold toxins on this test. And so it checks a little bit for black mold. So 5 days before the test, doing liposomal glutathione, I think is a really good practice. And so you can see if somebody has dopamine depletion, hey, could this be potentially related to something that you were exposed to? Because again, and we talked about this on the podcast, on my podcast, most people don't know that they're exposed to mold. Most people have no idea. It's like, they're like, well, and it's associated with, oh my goodness, no, I'm clean. I'm clean. I mean, I'm not dirty. I don't have mold. And so there's some association with like you being a dirty person and that's why you have mold in your house. That's ridiculous. So it's related to water damage. So I always recommend doing that. So the organic acids test is definitely one of the first places to start. And on the organic acids test, it checks for a fair number of nutrients in that pathway. Now, it doesn't check for magnesium and it also doesn't check for copper, which are two important pieces, but it does check for the B12, B9, B6, as well as vitamin C. So you can get a fair amount of information on what potentially will cause that, and you can get a little bit of information on gut health. So it's kind of like an overall, and also it looks at oxidative markers or oxidative stress in your body to know if maybe chemicals could be at the root cause. So you can kind of direct your care that way.
Yeah, that's great information. I have a question, a clarifying question on what you shared. The glutathione challenge.
Yeah.
Is the reason we want to do that is because when we force the cells, glutathione will help the cells produce more energy and it will flush out some of the mold. Is that why we do that?
Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
interesting. Yeah, I didn't know about that. I love that. Do you do any kind of Dutch testing to look at hormones?
I love Dutch testing, and Dutch test also checks for the dopamine as well as the epinephrine precursors, just like the oats test does, because there can be an oats portion of the Dutch test. So yes, I love the Dutch test. I generally wait till later to run the Dutch test. The reason for that is because I want to see what else is going on in their system that could be affecting their hormones, because hormones have an inverse relationship with inflammation. So if you're constantly living in a moldy house, or you have all these other gut toxicity toxins, you have, etc., whatever it is that's going on in your body, I think hormones are I fix hormones last, as a general rule, because I see so much more progress with that. And sometimes I'll run all the tests together initially, but for the most part, I run a battery of tests at the beginning, and then I run a Dutch test closer to the end, just because a lot of times, especially in people that are relatively young or healthy, their hormones will balance out on their own. And so I always give them the option, if they want to run it or not. But a lot of times people opt to not do it because they feel great with some of the other things. But
Yeah, I love that philosophy, because you're right. Even if you could optimize the hormones and get it into an optimized level, if there's inflammation around the cells, if we're not getting into the cell, we're not going to feel well. So we
right.
want to do everything we can to bring down cellular inflammation, and then they could become more sensitive and actually dock to these receptor sites and do their job.
Yeah, and I think a really strong example of that is I work with some athletes, and I've had athletes that were on testosterone injections, and their testosterone is barely moving on the dial. And they're like, I don't understand why this is happening. Da, 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 da. And, just doing something that is an anti-inflammatory herb. In a couple cases, I've used turmeric, while they were going for these injections, and it's jumping up like 100, 200 points where it
Wow.
hasn't moved at all. So that shows just the and I'm oversimplifying that, but that
Totally.
just shows the relationship between testosterone and inflammation. As testosterone goes down, generally you can make the assumption that inflammation is up.
Oh, that is super fascinating. Great share. I have another question for you. You said most people are deficient in vitamin B6, magnesium, and vitamin C. Do you
Mhm.
recommend supplementing with that or getting it through nutrition on a daily basis?
I supplement because generally my folks are so low on that. And most of the time when somebody comes to see me, they have really bad gut health. When I'm running a GI panel to see what's going on, tends to be a lot of things. Like there tends to be a lot of things on it. Like the H. pylori is, affecting the nutrition. Like for example, their H. pylori has an affinity for iron. So if you see somebody that's chronically iron deficient, a lot of times there's bacteria in their gut or dysbiosis that's actually eating and feeding off of that and multiplying and reproducing, creating that inflammation. It could be anything. So I generally supplement, but I tend to want to kill critters before I supplement because in really extreme examples, you'll see the bacteria grow. So I like to basically do a gut killing protocol
Got it.
first before supplementing, and then and then if I can optimize their gut, then they can get it through diet, and that's ideal. That's the plan.
Yeah, I love that. So you do a killing phase, you incorporate maybe oil of oregano, allicin, I mean, whatever it is that you want to incorporate with your clients, and you kill down some of that bacteria,
Mhm.
build it back up with healthy bacteria, and then they can start digesting their food better, getting their vitamins from their foods,
Yeah.
along with supplementation. Yeah, I think that's great too. When somebody is supplementing with vitamin B6, do you also recommend they supplement with all the B vitamins, or is it okay to just do vitamin B6?
Depends on what I find on their testing. I will generally give a product that has, B6, B9, B2, and uh, B6, B9, B12, and B2, just to hit that whole pathway. But I check to see what the individual, I check to see like where they're high and where they're low. So sometimes I just give B6 if they're, if the rest of their levels are good. But sometimes, if I don't know, I'll generally give the entire complex.
Got it. And I know we have some Keto Camp Academy members watching right now. Just keep posting your questions. I see them. We're going to spend some time towards the end, and Dr. Ann's going to answer as many questions as possible. So keep them coming. Uh, what about somebody who's listening or watching right now who's doing keto and they keep falling off track, right? I'm going to stay disciplined, the willpower thing that you spoke about, and then all of a sudden they find themselves, arm deep in a bag of Cheetos or even like healthy chips. They're knocking themselves out of ketosis, but they committed to being in ketosis and they just keep going back and forth. What is happening to this person at the neurotransmitter level?
Well, that's, okay. That's a great question. I quote a song called, that's Guns N' Roses. I used to do a little, but a little wouldn't do it, so the little got more and more. So maybe initially you feel like, okay, wow, I just need a bite of that donut. I need a bite of that donut to feel satisfied. And that tasted so good. And it was like, yes. And then that bite of that donut turned into half a donut. And then that half a donut turned into full donut. And then the box of donuts is blowing away and you're passed out from a sugar high, right? And so what we're looking at is the processed carbohydrates make our neurotransmitters pop back up, and then they make them crash lower than we were before. So an extreme example of this is in binge eating. So with binge eating, these people, the only time that they feel normal is when they're actually in a binge, overeating food, overeating carbohydrates, overeating sugar, because that is the only time their serotonin and their dopamine levels are actually going up. So there was a study that was done with rats, and they took rats and they had them fast for 12 hours. I mean, it wasn't really an option. They fasted. So
Yeah.
the rats fasted, two groups of rats. At the end of that, one group of rats got rat chow and they wanted to measure their dopamine levels. And then the other group of rats got a sucrose solution, so a sugar solution, as well as a rat chow. And so they wanted to see what happened to dopamine levels. So the control group that just got the rat chow, whatever that is, their dopamine levels stayed consistent. The rat group that actually got the sucrose solution as well as the rat food, their dopamine levels increased to 150% of normal when they had the sucrose solution.
Wow.
And they drank at the very beginning when they were just set free, they drank a ton of that sucrose solution. And each day it kept on getting higher and higher and higher to maintain that same dopamine level. So when you are knee deep or elbow deep in a bag of chips or a donut or whatever, name your vice here, or overeating, etc., you're trying to increase your dopamine levels. But then what happens is that the dopamine levels drop lower than they were before. So we're in a nasty feedback loop where we feel great, but in order to maintain that, we need to have more. And so that's why the rats drank more and more and more and more sucrose solution. Rats will choose dopamine over food and water every single time. That is how powerful that neurochemical is. That is how good it makes you feel. And so a lot of people just don't feel normal. And so if our dopamine gets depleted by nutrient deficiencies, how many people have nutrient deficiencies? I would argue most people that aren't working on that, right? How many people have gut issues? Guess what? Dopamine is stored in the gut. So when you're looking at that, if you have a bunch of gut issues, whatever it could be, potentially parasitic infections, candida overgrowth, leaky gut, blah, 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 name your dysbiosis, name whatever it is here, the dopamine that's stored in the gut, you're dumping, and some of the dopamine is actually made in the gut. And then we're looking at, for example, stress. Like, who doesn't have, stress, or like they just are, just too many places in one time, or environmental chemicals or whatever, so all of these things create problems in your system and are going to deplete your dopamine levels. So the free way we know to boost this up, or the legal way, is with food. The illegal way is with drugs.
This is so fascinating. I love this conversation. That was really well explained. So my next thought when you were explaining that was, okay, we get dopamine hits from social media. We get dopamine hits from processed foods. We get dopamine hits from food in general. Do you recommend maybe a daily practice, a weekly practice, or even a monthly practice of intentional dopamine fasting, where you have no stimulations, you're just out there in nature, you're just present to kind of reset that dopamine balance?
Yeah, I mean, I would. People won't do it for me. Like, my subset, that's just not their, I think it's really important to go camping or to be out away or to be out away from devices, because it resets a lot of things in your system, but generally, people won't do it, even if I recommend it. I think it's a great idea. I think it's a great tip to do. But most people don't do it.
But here's what I do. I don't really go camping and do all that, although I would love to. I think it's a great idea.
Yeah.
I do daily little hits of reset. So in the morning, I don't check my phone for an hour after waking up. I'll go for a morning walk with my dog. I'll do affirmations. No stimulation. Just so that's like an hour of kind of resetting that dopamine balance. And then I'll sprinkle that out throughout the day. I'll go on my rooftop. I'll work out. I'll just, which kind of does working out spark dopamine?
Yeah, it's good for it. Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's good for it. So I'll do a workout, and then I'll do some affirmations on my rooftop, and then I'll go for another walk in the afternoon with my dog and my girlfriend, sometimes to the beach. So these are kind of ways for me to sprinkle it in there. Of course, I'm blessed to have the opportunity to do this throughout my day, but the point is we could sprinkle it in there, and there is benefits to doing that. So
huge.
Yeah,
Huge.
huge. Exactly.
What you're doing is awesome. I mean, I think it's huge. I mean, we're addicted to our phones. We're addicted to, how many people like whatever we're doing on social media. Like, it's really good to take a break from all of that. I think social media is huge. And I mean, it's sad because we see people, killing themselves because they didn't get enough likes for a post, which is tragic. And so that kind of shows you the level of depletion that we have created with dopamine. So if you can start to remove some of those things, some of those stressors in your everyday life, that's important. Or just how much you're checking your email, how much you're on your phone, getting out in the sunshine, that is so important for neurotransmitter making, because we have serotonin receptors in our eyes. You know, getting direct sunlight into our eyes, getting out and moving your body, those things are critical, critical.
Mm. So I'm doing something good there.
For sure. And
The next question is about going back to methylation. We know that there's something called the methylation priority principle, where your body will, when you have stress, mental, emotional, chemical stress going on for too long, your body will prioritize methylation to deal with those stressors. Heavy metals specifically. Let's talk about heavy metals. So meanwhile, your body could take a methyl group to deal with heavy metals, and then it'll deplete it. But then in the same time, you have cancer growing, estrogen dominance. And so the body will prioritize survival in the short term and then develop cancer long term. Could you let me know if I explained that right and then go a little bit deeper?
so I don't think I'm fully understanding the question. I don't fully understand it.
Yeah. So when we have heavy metals in the body, when we
Yeah.
have silver fillings, when we have high amounts of lead, will
Mhm.
the body prioritize methyl groups to deal with the heavy metals while it'll allow toxic estrogen, for example, to grow and go down pathways we don't want it to go?
I don't know, honestly. I actually don't know if that's true or not. So to be completely honest with you.
Okay, well, I think it does. I know Dr. Pompa talks about this, and he calls it the methylation priority principle. But I don't have concrete research to back it up with this conversation. But
I haven't, yeah, I haven't looked in the research on that. So I honestly I don't know.
Okay, so
To
we
tell you
we
the
will
truth.
revisit that
Mhm.
conversation when we do round two. Okay,
Okay, deal.
let's move on to keto. A lot of my audience do keto; they do fasting. Does being in ketosis benefit neurotransmitters in any way?
Yeah. So one of the biggest, I think one of the biggest things is we see that hormones, as long as this is, as long as somebody is not stressing their body in ketosis, right? We know that all hormones rise in ketosis. So, for example, we're like, for example, the epinephrine and norepinephrine, right? We know that we can actually stop adrenal fatigue and that all of these hormones are actually going to rise, and it takes the pressure off of like constant fatigue in the adrenal glands. Slowing down, not having to digest all the time, not eating foods that can be potentially inflammatory for the system. Absolutely. So, yes, yeah, it's very, very beneficial for neurotransmitters as long as you're not too depleted, as long as you're like somebody that should be fasting and you don't have an eating disorder. So I think I want to just make sure that that's clear, that if somebody is starving themselves and they're not putting in proper nutrition when they start to eat again. So, somebody's like, I'm doing keto, and they are, just fasting and they've got a little bit more of an eating disorder, you'll see it drop.
Mm,
You'll see the hormones drop. But as a
interesting.
general rule, no, it's actually really good for neurotransmitters.
Okay, awesome. That's
Mhm.
great.
Yep.
Now, you mentioned dopamine, serotonin. What are some of the other big players when it comes to neurotransmitters?
So I think GABA and ACH is another huge, huge player in that. And so they're all so wonderful to just feel good. So ACH or acetylcholine is so important for our brain health. It looks at remembering names, remembering numbers, putting a face with a name, etc. So it's just your cognitive ability. We know that this gets depleted in people that have neurodegeneration. So we're seeing that be depleted. GABA is awesome. GABA is for, folks that are wired but tired type of mentality. They feel that inward trembling. I kind of describe them like Tigger. So dopamine depletion, I describe like Eeyore. And then for example, for GABA, I think of it more like Tigger. They're just sort of anxious all the time, and they don't really know what they're anxious about, but everything is setting them off. And I think that is, that tends to be GABA. And so that just calms everything down in our brain. And so, and in pretty common deficiency as well.
So somebody who's wired and tired, somebody who maybe gets alerted from sounds really quickly, has low amounts of GABA typically.
A lot of times, and a lot of times they have a pretty substantial cortisol dysregulation in their adrenal glands. So they tend to be heightened. And so I like to calm those neurochemicals down.
So how do you do that? How do you calm it down, and how do you increase your ACH?
So I actually give ACH. So that's a choline. You can do that. So acetyl L. Yeah, so you can just give it as a supplement.
Great.
I give GABA straight as a supplement. I give the precursors to serotonin and the precursors for dopamine as a supplement. And then what we do is we do adaptogenic herbs to calm down the adrenal glands. And so I think it's just figuring out and making it all work together. People are generally afraid, for example, especially with serotonin, because so many people have heard of SSRIs, and they're afraid. They're like, are you giving me an SSRI? Are you giving me, no, absolutely not. So I'm giving you the precursors to make serotonin, and anything that you don't need, you're going to pee out. So that's because when we're looking at an SSRI and how what we're doing with supplementation is different than an SSRI. So with an SSRI, you're just not absorbing or uptaking the serotonin that you already have. SSRI is not giving you more serotonin, okay? When we actually are building up the precursors, we're giving you those that you need to make your own serotonin so that you feel better. And then when you come off of it, it's not this violent, I'm going to have like a lightning electrical bolts in my system and have all these brain zaps for the next however long, month, 2 months, as I'm coming off of this thing and feel terrible, because your serotonin levels have naturally been increased. What ends up happening is people, I generally give people a time frame of how long they need to be on the neurotransmitters, based on what their levels are. And none of that's an exact science, because, stress can kick up, or they can get exposed to something else or whatnot. So, so things can deplete it. But as a general rule, you can say, okay, you probably need to be on this bottle of supplementation, for example, say, 2 months or 3 months, right? I believe that supplements have a beginning, a middle, and an end, like any good story. You want to fix the problem and move on, fix this problem and move on. So some things you might need longer term, but ultimately, you want to fix a problem and move on. So with that, people start to forget to take it, and they feel so good and they're enjoying their life that they don't need it anymore.
I love that. I love your philosophy regarding supplements. I'm very similar. We rotate them. They're targeted approach.
Yeah.
Because we don't want the body to reach a homeostasis. We always want to mix things up. And I love that you use adaptogen herbs as well. What are your favorite neurotransmitter building foods? What are your favorite foods?
Well, you really want, proteins are really important for that. Vegetables, protein and vegetables and fats are all really important. Nuts and seeds, all of those things should be able to build it as long as your gut is working well. We should have enough. We should be getting enough tyrosine and tryptophan in the standard American diet from the foods that we're eating. Spinach and, eggs and, protein, animal protein. Drop any of that in there. Those are all really good neurotransmitter building foods. I think what I'd like to focus on are neurotransmitter depleting foods.
Yeah.
Processed carbohydrates, sugars, alcohols, drugs, just leave them alone. There's a study done with Nestle. I think it was in either the 80s or the 90s, and they estimated that there were 11,000 new foods each year hitting the shelves of supermarkets. How we can have 11,000 new foods, yeah, let's put that in quotation marks, hitting the shelves in a grocery department, I have no idea, because I don't know that many different varieties of brand new apples or brand new olive oil or like what. So 11,000 new foods were hitting the shelves. And so you have to think of these things like any, and this is going to be in the inside aisles of the grocery store.
Right.
And guess what? And so the food manufacturers know that when they're going to sprinkle in sugar under fancy, funny names, that you become addicted. And so the goal is for you to become addicted, because when you eat that ketchup, when you eat that salad dressing, when you eat those crackers, you feel so good. You have such a high with that you want to continue to buy that brand over and over again, because what? You get a neurotransmitter hit and you feel amazing. And so that's when you go to your favorite restaurant, etc., because sugar and all of these processed carbohydrates, they're a drug, and you get a neurochemical hit.
These food companies, I call them Frankenfood mafias, they hire scientists who know exactly what Dr. Ann's teaching here. The only difference is that they use it for evil to get people addicted to these foods, but Dr. Ann is using it to teach people how the body works to make sure you live a healthier life. You're right. Stay away from the middle aisle. Stay away from these fancy packaging, and just eat real food. I mean, real food. You said protein, fats, vegetables. That's keto. That's keto, and it doesn't even require a label to be on there to eat real food. That stat you gave is insane. Those are all fake foods that come on the market, and they research how this is reacting in the body and how addicting it is. And the higher it is when it comes to the addiction scale, the faster it'll be on the shelf in the supermarket, which is sick.
Right, and it sells, right? I mean, patients will come in, and when I explain this, and I'm like, listen, you need to look at your ketchups. And they're like, my ketchups? Really? Are you sure? Yes, I'm positive. You need to look at your salad dressings. And when you say sugar, people are like, well, I mean, I'm not eating cookies, cakes, and candies, so I'm not eating sugar. But you really have to sit down and you have to read these labels. And when you hand somebody something that says, okay, you can have protein, you can have some fruits, you can have vegetables, you can have fats, etc., they're like, what do I eat? What do I eat? Okay, let's go through what you can eat. But that's what we're programmed to do, is to not be able to live without these foods, to be so addicted that you don't even know how to cook or how to eat without these prepackaged box foods that you've become addicted to.
It's the stupid American diet, the sad diet.
I was stupid American diet. I've never heard that. I like that.
So before I get to the questions here from the keto
Sure.
campers, do you recommend, if somebody is not breaking down protein and fats well, do you recommend taking a digestive enzyme?
Yeah, I generally run a stool panel. The reason for that is because I see on stool panels, I see H. pylori be present in 50 to 60% of the stool panels that I'm running. And then generally it's also circulating the family because it's highly contagious. So I want to see why, potentially their stomach acids are off before giving them a digestive enzyme just solely. I mean, but I want to make sure I know why that's off. I mean, clear as we age, we don't have as much digestive function. And so I think later in life, yes, I think digestive enzymes make sense as a general rule, but I want to make sure that I know why and have gotten to the root of the problem. Because a lot of times, an H. pylori infection makes your stomach more alkaline, or it changes the pH where you can't break down the food. So I want to make sure we know why someone's not breaking down the food. And if they need a digestive enzyme, great. But yeah, I want to know why.
It makes a lot of sense. So you have a protocol for H. pylori. Could you share a little bit of what you do? Do you use like Methylation and killers? Like, how do you deal with it?
Depends. It depends on what's on it. So a lot of times I'll use oregano oil, Oregon grape, berberine, any of those types of herbs. A lot of times I'll do biofilm breakers, like I'll utilize serapeptidase type things to go ahead and break that down to get rid of the biofilm around them. It depends on what they have on their stool test. If I think it's pretty straightforward, but generally H. pylori should be gone within 1 to 2 months. If not, then I generally dig deeper. Again, I see a hierarchy as it relates to things that I'm killing off. I think that, mold definitely dysregulates the gut in a pretty big way. So I think mold is like Satan's bride. So I think of he's on the, he on the top end of things. And then, I want to make sure they don't have a parasitic infection. I actually honestly do not find a ton of parasitic infections where I am. Anytime I run a stool panel outside of my general area, I find a lot more parasites, but I'm at altitude. I'm in Colorado, and I don't know if that's potentially why, but I do not see, and I run a PCR test, which is checking for DNA of parasites. So we're not looking for just the worm or the egg in there, the larva, etc. So they're actually checking for DNA byproducts, but I don't find it a lot in my general area. It's less common. And then, we're going down, viruses, bacteria, and then, candida being opportunistic. So, I kind of, and on this, I think one thing that I haven't touched on is one thing that I do find on a lot of stool tests is we check for, I use a GI map, by the way.
I was going to ask you. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. So I use a GI map. And there's a couple good tests out there, but that's just what I prefer. One thing that I see in a lot of chronic gut cases, or where people have had, they've been through all kinds of protocols, they've had all kinds of gut problems, is I generally find that somebody has had dental infections or they have dental problems.
Me too.
Yeah. And so on this test, it actually checks to see how much oral bacteria is actually in your gut. And
That's
so if it's
fascinating.
above a certain level, I always make somebody go and get a cone beam scan and to double check to see what's going on to get that addressed. Because for me, like, I will never be able to fix it with herbs alone. Will it be able to help? But I mean, my job isn't to kind of like, oh, I want to get you to 30%. We'll see what happens from there. I mean, that sucks. That's not why I got into this. So, I mean, we want to just make sure that we're treating the problem. And if there's an infection in your mouth, you will never fix it. By the way, I had that. So I personally
had a cavitation.
I had a cavitation after wisdom tooth removal 20 years later. Like, it was just like I had a hole on the right side of my jaw.
And you went through the whole surgery. It's a whole process. Good on you doing that, though.
I never did the surgery. I know that that's like the gold standard. I did ozone injections.
Got it.
I did 3 years of ozone injections.
Wow.
And my gum line, my jaw, and all of that, it finally has blood supply. It bleeds, and my bacteria is low in my gut, and I don't have any problems. So that's what I did. That's kind of a fringe there. That is not the gold standard in the literature.
Right.
I want to be really clear about that. Gold standard in the literature is surgery and removing the ligament. I just don't like surgery.
Yeah. Well, and for those listening or watching, what is a cavitation? It's a tiny little cave that forms in your gums that you can't see with the naked eye, or even a regular X-ray. We'd have to get a specific scan called a 3D cone beam scan, which some holistic dentists have it, not all. But you also need to know how to read the scan. So that's the first step to get it done, but you need to have somebody who knows how to read it. And then if you have a cavitation, you got to get it taken care of. And Dr. Ann said the gold standard is surgery for sure. But what it does, it's these nasty bacteria, these anaerobic bacteria that communicate to your gut back and forth. And like you said, you can't get somebody well if they have this going on. And there's an 88% chance for a cavitation if you've had a wisdom tooth extracted. Mm-hmm. That's insane. So I've done the scan on myself. Thankfully, I didn't have it.
That's good.
Yeah, you're doing great work. I love. There's a lot of alignment with both of our teachings.
I know. I mean, we totally do. And I think, And by the way, I just want to caution people out there. I have seen like full blown mouth bacteria, full blown, etc., like bacteria, in like people are doing cone beam scans, and it's very clear that they have that bacteria in their gut, and they'll go to a dentist, and the dentist is like, no, you don't have it. And then we'll do a nebulizer treatment. I'll have them do a nebulizer treatment with herbs and whatnot. And they're like, there's just crazy green mucus coming out of my sinuses and out of my mouth and etc. So, I generally will do a challenge just to see if they cannot get proper dental care.
Fascinating. Okay, so we have enough time to get to a few questions here.
Okay.
So let's get to, we have Monica in the Bahamas, we have Katie in New York, we have Echo in Hawaii, and Echo says, you can see the question there, how would we know what we are lacking? What type of testing can we take?
Um, with the dopamine, I generally run an oats test just to see what is going on. When I also run this test because it checks for certain bacterial markers. And if you have these bacterial markers, they're in like the C. diff family, etc. Dopamine and phenylalanine is contraindicated. Okay. So we don't give precursors for dopamine in that situation. You can take a tyrosine supplement, but you have to be careful about boosting and supporting that because it can cause brain inflammation. So that's why I run an oats test to just double check and just see what the levels are so I can kill two birds with one stone.
That's great. And the oats test is a urine test, correct?
Yeah. Yep. That's the one we talked about doing the glutathione challenge with and all of that. Yep.
Thank you. And the next one's from Kira in Canada. Dr. Ann Marie Barter, how do we test for MTHFR gene mutation, which affects the liver detoxification process?
So generally what I'm doing for that, you can do a lot of genetic testing for that. There's multiple ways to do that. I generally am checking homocysteine in my practice to see, and I give methylated Bs. That's just what I do. So when homocysteine is high on my lab work, which basically is a pathway that causes either cardiovascular problems or brain problems, I generally give methylated Bs, and I give the whole complex. So I'm going to give B2, B6, folate, and B12 that's methylated.
Great answer. And then next question from Judy in Canada as well says, how do you increase glutathione, please?
I give straight glutathione. So I give it straight. I give something called GSH or glutathione, and I just give it in a liposomal form. I think that is critical for overall health. And just do that. Take a liposomal form of that. I know that people say that NAC completely converts to glutathione, and can it? Yes. But I think that your bang for your buck of getting glutathione is so much better when you do a liposomal. Some people want to do IV injections. That's fine as well. But the amount of toxins that glutathione is going to clear out and be able to mobilize is about 90% of the toxins that we're exposed to respond to glutathione. So when we're talking about cleaning out or chelating metals, you need to have glutathione. When we're talking about mold, it's always part of my mold protocol. When we're talking about environmental exposures, like when we're talking benzene, which is, we're exposed to that when we drive, pesticides, etc., 90% of those chemicals respond to that.
Yeah, well said. I use intracellular glutathione as well, and I bring it on when the detox pathways are ready for detoxification.
Right.
Next one is from Monica regarding the mold. Approximately how long may you have water damage before black mold will develop?
It depends on where you live. 48 hours.
Yeah, right. Exactly. She's in the Bahamas, so it's very humid there, just like Miami. So probably less than 48 hours.
Yeah, it can be pretty quick. And remember, black mold is used in warfare. It's used in, so I mean, it's nasty stuff. I mean, again, just so be careful. The mold that grows where I am in a dry climate is pretty serious mold. So yes, it can be very, very quick.
Last question. I don't know who it is because it says Facebook user, but where can I get the test done? Can they reach out to you to get these tests done?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Where's the best place for them to find you?
You can just give us a call, or go to our website, altfam.com. Just reach out, say that you heard us on this show, and we'll run the tests. We'll go ahead and get those run for you.
And for those listening and watching after the live stream here, we'll put that in the notes of the podcast. Where else can we find your work, Dr. Ann Marie Barter?
Yeah, my full name, huh? So I have a podcast called Fearless Health Podcast. So you can find me there. I podcast a fair amount, so you can find me on other shows. And you can find a ton of information on fearlesshealthpodcast.com, as well as AltFamMed, short for Alternative Family Medicine.com. So that's us.
Awesome. We'll put Rachel, our show notes extraordinaire. We'll put all the links and resources to Dr. Ann's work in the notes of the podcast, in the notes of the YouTube channel. This was a great conversation. I just totally
Thanks.
digged it so much. You are doing such great work because
So are
you're.
you.
Thank you, but
Yeah.
I want to acknowledge you because I'm just so blown away by your knowledge, but also the fact that you're using so many therapies. It's a multi-therapeutic approach,
Mhm.
and it's kind of rare. I got to be honest with you; it's kind of rare to find somebody who's looking at health from all of these angles. I've spoken to a lot of brilliant people, but it's not common to see them look at the mold, the heavy metals, the cavitations, and conversations like this just light me up because I know you're doing great work in your community and on your podcast and on your YouTube channel. So thank you for showing up and educating my audience and educating me. And I can't wait to do round 2 with you.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. It's just such a gift to be here and share this. So I appreciate the opportunity.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Ann Barter. Check out the links and the resources down below. Go check out her YouTube channel, her podcast. I was grateful enough to be a guest on her podcast. We did talk about keto, right? And most of you are probably doing keto or thinking about doing keto. I have a 10-part series on how to do keto the right way so you could get results that stick for the rest of your life. And I want to direct you to that 10-part series so you can really understand how to do keto at the cellular level. Click this video right here and get started on your keto journey the right way. See you in the next video.